How long does it take for a person to stop being who they used to be? 20 years? 30? Is there a point where we have to admit that we're no longer describing the person in front of us, that we're describing a memory? I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Hey, it's Monday. Here we go. It's the Call Me Tony
An old newspaper isn't useless because it's wrong. In fact, it might be completely accurate because it reported on what actually happened that day. The problem is that it's no longer today's news. And sometimes I wonder if we do the same thing with people. This isn't an episode about forgiveness. It's not about second chances. And it sure as hell isn't about me asking anyone to see me differently. If you're here listening to this podcast, assuming I'm going to make a case for why I think I'm actually a pretty great person, I think you're going to be disappointed. I have no interest in defending my past because I value it too much. There are parts of my history that just aren't very flattering. There are decisions I made that hurt people. There are beliefs I held that embarrass the fuck out of me now. And I don't argue with any of that because I think the historical record actually matters. If I'm willing to rewrite my own history, I mean, what else am I going to be willing to rewrite? And for this reason, I don't want yesterday's paper thrown away. I want it archived. Archives matter. I mean, you can't understand where you are when you've erased where you've been. The problem is that archives aren't where we go to find out what's happening today. And that's the part I've been wrestling with. Like, how do we decide who someone is right now? Not who they were, not who they claim to be, who they actually are. I spend a lot of time talking about the value of evidence, whether the topic is religion, politics, relationships, or psychology. I keep coming back to the same question. What would it take to convince me that I'm wrong? And if my answer to that is nothing, then I'm not following the evidence anymore. I'm protecting my conclusion. And I think that principle applies to people just as much as ideas. If I believe someone is dishonest, what evidence would convince me otherwise? If I believe someone is abusive, what would convince me that they've fundamentally changed? And again, if the answer is nothing, then I've stopped evaluating the person. I've created an identity for them that no amount of evidence could ever penetrate. And that idea makes me very uncomfortable, not because of what it means for me, because of what it says about the way we all think. At what point do we stop evaluating evidence and start protecting an opinion? The last couple of decades have been an ongoing process of change for me. Therapy, reading, philosophy, conversations that forced me to admit that I was wrong, losing beliefs that I used to think I would die defending, changing my mind about morality, changing how I approach certain conflicts, changing my understanding of relationships. Of course, none of that proves that I'm a good person. It proves something much smaller than that. It proves that I'm not the same person. And those aren't identical claims. There are situations I know with complete confidence that I would never handle the way I handled them 20 years ago. Not because I'm trying harder, but because the person making those decisions doesn't really exist anymore. The history exists, the consequences exist, the memories definitely exist, but that particular version of me is gone. Now, here's where all of this starts to get uncomfortable. For me, I'm just as capable of reading yesterday's papers as anybody else is. There's someone in my own life who I have permanently archived. Now, I think they actually have changed. I think they're probably a better person than they used to be. And I also think I will never willingly expose myself to them again. Now, I don't think that those ideas contradict each other. Believing someone has changed doesn't obligate me to trust them. It doesn't obligate me to reconcile with them. And it doesn't obligate me to pretend that the past didn't happen. Boundaries have nothing to do with the idea that people can't change. Boundaries are um, more of a declaration that history still has consequences. And I think that's an important distinction. Like, I really don't mind if someone says, Tony, I believe you've changed, but I just don't want a relationship with you. I get it. And honestly, I respect it. What I'm struggling with is something different. It's when someone has watched the later editions arrive and still insists on quoting the earliest one anyway. Not because that's where the evidence leads, it's because that's the story they've decided to keep telling. And at some point, that stops being about accountability. It starts becoming an unwillingness to update your understanding of reality. And maybe changing your opinion about another person requires changing your opinion about yourself. Maybe you've invested too much in the old story. Maybe admitting that they've changed forces you to ask whether you've been fair to them. I don't know. What I do know is that I don't want special treatment. If yesterday's paper describes me accurately, then leave it in the archive. Don't edit it, don't soften it. Please don't pretend that it never happened. Just don't mistake it for today's edition. If we're committed to following evidence wherever it leads, then that commitment has to include people. Otherwise, we're not really following evidence at all. We're preserving our conclusions. And maybe that's what I've been trying to answer all along. Like, how do we know when someone has changed? It's not because they say they have, and it's not because we hope they have. It's because the evidence has become too overwhelming to justify believing anything else. If your answer is nothing can change my mind, then I don't think you've described human nature. I think you've described an archive. And archives might be wonderful places to understand history, but they're really shitty places to learn what's happening today.